What's up guys, I'm Quinn. Today I'm bringing you a video on my current Rust settings. These are the Rust settings I've used for pretty much all of 2021. So first we're going to start with our options, our game options. For gameplay, our field of view, obviously make sure that's maxed out. That's a huge deal. I wouldn't really recommend putting it below 90 ever. So our first settings, on, off, on, that's not really a huge deal. Those are kind of all personal preference. Obviously keep compass visibility on up there. Censorship, underwear, I usually keep that on. The rest of those are a personal preference until we get to max Gibbs. Make sure your max Gibbs is at 0. That is a huge deal. RGB lighting enabled and brightness, those are fine. For our user interface settings, our user interface scale should be 1. Obviously that's also personal preference, and the rest of these are technically all personal preference. These are just what I have it at. Show HUD, obviously you're going to want to have that on. That's not personal preference. Make sure you keep that on. User interface scale, honestly, some people change that. I don't really notice a huge difference, but that's pretty much it for our user interface settings. For our audio settings, this is usually what I have it at. I currently have it on 2 because I'm filming a video, but I usually have it on 0.4, so that's usually what I recommend keeping it on. I have everything else down here off except for game sounds. Obviously game sound should be on. Keep instrument and voice props volume off if you're gonna like aim train. There's always kids spamming music and stuff in the aim train servers. Voices volume I'd recommend keeping off unless you're talking to someone in game. So that's pretty much it for our audio settings. Keep your speaker config on stereo, obviously. So for our mouse settings, these are super important. So I have mine at 0.4 for my mouse sensitivity. I'm playing on 800 DPI, and then for aiming mouse sensitivity, I have mine on 1. I had it on 0.7 before, and I would definitely recommend not having it below 1. It's pretty annoying unless you have like a massive mouse pad. You're gonna need a lot of desk space if you're gonna want to keep it below 1. Like literally, it's super hard to aim with it below 1 in my opinion. But yeah, that's pretty much it for our mouse settings. And then for our keybinds, I pretty much have everything like default in here, other than obviously my use button. I have that as my first mouse button, I'm pretty sure. So my use button is my mouse button, so instead of hitting E, I could still hit E, and I do sometimes. It's just a personal preference thing for that one. And for hover loot, I actually have that as my second mouse button, so instead of me having to reach over and hit H or hold H while I'm looting someone, I could just hold my mouse button, and for me that works pretty well. I find that to be a lot more convenient. The rest of these settings are all just kind of personal preference. I don't change any of them. But obviously I have a video on keybinds, and keybinds is not the same thing as this. And by keybinds I mean you go into your F1 console and you bind certain keys to do certain things. So for example, I have my N key crafting bandages and stuff like that. So I'll link that video in the description if you guys want to check that out. I think it's pretty helpful. For my resolution, obviously I usually match it to my monitor. If you do want the best FPS possible, I'd recommend keeping your like screen mode on exclusive. It's super convenient having it on borderless, so that's what I keep it on. I would probably get better FPS. Obviously, if you're playing stretch res, you need to be on exclusive. It literally doesn't work if you don't have it on exclusive. You know, have black bars on the side of your screen. But when I did play stretch res, it's been years since I played stretch res, but I played 1280 by 1024, and that is very, very stretched. You're actually probably going to want to mess with your user interface scale if you're going to play stretched, but I really wouldn't recommend playing stretched. Obviously, if you have really bad PC specs, stretch could help. I actually have my VSync right here. My VSync is off. FPS limit is at 0. I had some guy trying to argue with me in the comments about that the other day. That's pretty dumb. Obviously, you want the maximum amount of FPS possible, and FPS limit 0. It does not limit your FPS to 0 like you would think it would. It actually helps reduce frame stutter in my opinion, so I usually keep that at 0. And yeah, that's pretty much it for our screen settings. Obviously, yeah, that FPS limit is a huge deal in my opinion, so just please keep it at that. Obviously, you could do it at like max FPS, but that's really not going to make a huge difference. You're not going to get huge FPS on Rust. It's just not really going to happen. It's a pretty poorly optimized game. For our graphics settings right here, I have all these maxed right now because I was just filming a cinematic. Obviously, don't max them out unless you're trying to film a cinematic. Graphics quality should be 1, and make sure you keep your shadow cascades at 2. I don't recommend using DLSS. It helps a little bit with FPS, but it's not a huge difference, and it makes everything blurry. I have everything else for graphics quality turned down to 0 except for draw distance. Draw distance is actually just your render distance. So that's why I have that maxed out. It really doesn't make a huge difference in terms of FPS in my opinion. Grass displacement on, and NVIDIA reflex mode is on. The latency marker, the reflex latency marker, I'd recommend keeping that off. It'll make a weird white dot pop up on your screen if you have that on, so I really wouldn't recommend having that on. For our mesh quality, I have everything turned down to 0, except for terrain quality. Obviously, I would recommend maxing that out. You'll have enemies hiding behind trees and stuff that don't load in, and nobody wants an enemy to be hiding behind a tree or a bush that would normally load in, and then you don't have that setting on, and it doesn't load in, and they kill you because you can't see them because they're behind a bush. No one likes that. That's definitely not fun. I've definitely had that happen to me when I used to play with that off. So I definitely recommend just always keeping that setting on. That's a pretty big deal. But overall, I'd recommend keeping these all off. Particle quality and object quality, they make a little bit of a difference between like how your items in your inventory look. So that's a little bit of a help. But we're just going to move on to our image effect settings, and for these I would recommend having your anti-aliasing at TSS-AA. None of these honestly make a huge difference. Make sure you have motion blur off. Motion blur is awful. Like, please never put that on in any game. It looks horrible. Honestly, I usually just have everything off. Make sure you have depth of field off as well, and then we'll move on to our experimental settings. I usually have everything off here except for occlusion culling. Obviously you're going to want to disable that if it lags when you're rotating the camera, but I usually have that on or off. Honestly, I switch between it a lot. I just think it looks nicer with it on, so that is why I usually have it on. Overall, these are just my Rust settings that I've used this year. If you guys have any questions or comments, please let me know in the description down below. I would really appreciate, like, if you guys have any questions, just let me know. Obviously, in the Discord is a better place. I'm trying to get to 1,000 members. We're at like 970, so that would help a ton if you guys would join the Discord. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video, and yeah, remember to like and subscribe.